Okay, so let us just recap. Okay, so the topic we started off was on history of project management. Okay, so I think at this moment you should be able to understand the difference between project and not a project. Cuma later on we'll go in detail lah. Okay, so what we consider as being a project and also not a project. Okay, so I think this is fine. Okay, so I think you grasp the idea that the theory actually started at the beginning of industrial revolution. Okay, so whereby the system was shifting fast between from agricultural to manufacturing, and then with all the transportation locomotive going on at that point of time, and then around the tools, the techniques basically was more or less established or more or less being introduced around World War One, World War Two. Okay, so that was pretty much to do with war management lah, basically what to do. Okay, so I did mention this that when we talk about all those the wonders of the world. Okay, so the wonders of the world, basically it is construction, but it takes what, at least macam pyramid 2 decades. Okay, so 20 over years. So hence when we try to associate them being project is a bit difficult. Okay, so it might be a project for those days. Okay, but to say that it particularly the characteristics of project susah sikit because their funding is probably could be said unlimited juga lah. Okay, so the resources are pretty much unlimited and so on. Okay, so that is why it is really different those days and also now, whereby we are very much constrained with the funding, with the resource and so on. Okay, so the tools that we are actually using, it started out very much long ago. Okay, so the theory that we actually adapted throughout the time until now started out very much long ago. Okay, so the Gantt chart is basically we can see at every construction site. Okay, so every site office there should be a Gantt chart of a project. Okay, so military, and then the modern project management more or less around 1960s, 1970s more or less. Okay, and nowadays when we are talking about project management, it is fast evolving. Okay, and it also takes into account the advancements of technology. So we are using a lot of software nowadays, a lot of communication tools which are much more, you know, it expedites our progress, it expedites our communication, information in, out information and so on. Okay, and of course globalization. So that's why you have a lot of contractors, consultants basically based overseas, but they are having projects here and vice versa. Okay, so a lot of changes actually, a lot of involvement throughout the project management spectrum. And of course, when we are moving towards industry 4.0 with Internet of Things, so a lot of installation of facilities also involve what do we call it? Involve internet between materials and so on, between facilities and so on. So a lot of this sensories. Okay, so a lot of motion sensor and so on that actually assist in what they call insecurity of building and so on. So a lot of changes lah, basically. So not only during construction. Okay, so the ease of conducting construction nowadays are it is supported by software, okay, such as BIM software, building information modeling software, whereby designers could actually visualize their design right away rather than they design it in 2D and then they can only see it coming up in physical, in 3D during construction. But now basically the designers can more or less visualize how the design would be constructed. Okay, so that would give an edge lah. So basically we can have a design whereby it is, you can basically walk into the building tapi in 3D form. Okay, so which means your design, it should what do you call, it should actually remove all the collision during construction, because some when 2D is quite difficult. You have a architectural drawing, you have M&E drawing, you have structural drawing in a separate manner. So when you go onto the site, or when during the contractors coming up with shop drawing, then they realize there is a collision between, for example, beam and also the what do you call that, access for M&E facilities. So during construction, you realize that is tedious, because sometimes you may require hacking and so on. You need to break down certain beams that has been completed and so on. But however, nowadays when you have BIM software, for example, you can already input the architecture drawing, you can input M&E drawing, you can input structural drawing. So from there, you can just run the collision test to see how many elements are hitting each other, and you can eliminate those in the software. So by right, if you it has been properly designed in a BIM software, it is just the aspect of constructing it on the site as it is. So it shouldn't be any mishap in such a way, unless it is something to do with ground that you might not come across. Okay, but I think nowadays with all those sensor technologies, you should be able to identify that as well. Okay, so meaning to say that in terms of ease of doing work, probably it is getting easier but more complicated as well, because it is not easy to navigate through the software as well. Okay, so in for example, for BIM software, you might require someone who is having or who has gone through certain set of skill using that software. So that's why I think one I've mentioned in the class, one of the important things that actually gives you an edge as an undergrad compared to the others is the skill. Okay, so the skill of using something more than the others. Okay, so your competency. So I think I did suggest in, or I did advise in the last class, try to get yourself the competence. Try to get yourself skill in certain software. BIM, one of the BIM software, for example, Revit. Okay, so try to expand your knowledge in that, and you might put it in your CV later on. Okay, so that would give you the a little bit of edge compared to the others. Okay, but nowadays a lot of people learning on their own on this as well. So try to take that opportunity. Okay. Just overview of project management. Okay, definition of, I think this is fine. Changes, so I did speak on it a little bit on that. Okay, so a lot are moving towards soft technique, less of hard technique. Okay, so from predictable model to unpredictable, because when we have a lot of knowledge in hand, okay, especially for the client, so they might see that option, that option, that option, and they might get input from other people. So that thing creates these changes among the client. Okay, so when that happen, it is quite difficult to ignore. Okay, so change management will come into picture lah. Okay, and development, okay, I think it's fine. Okay, so I think did we stop somewhere here? Or didn't we?
Yes.
Then, okay, so I hope I would reiterate this again. So I hope everyone would have gone through the video. So far, do you have any question on this topic? I'll just open up for a while, so that if you have gone through the video and if you have any question in regards to that, any thing you have to ask, so please do throw your question. Tak ada. Okay, so if no, I take it that you have gone through the video and you have understood it very well. Okay, so if so, we'll move on to the next one or the next topic, which is for today. Basically, we'll try to close up on this history of project management. Okay, so in general, basically, when we are talking about project management, okay, so is the skill, is the tool, is the process. Okay, you need to have a certain set of skill to be a good project manager. Okay, so there are good project manager, there are probably some not good, not too good project manager. Okay, so you can see from the results, it is quite apparent from the outcome of the project. Okay, so are the people happy working with a certain project manager? So there are certain skills that a project manager do have more compared to the others. Okay, and tools to support project management. Okay, so for example, nowadays in terms of scheduling, you can use Microsoft Project for small project, or you can use Primavera for a much larger complicated project that requires scheduling. And then management processes. Okay, so simple planning, organizing, leading, controlling. So there are certain processes. Okay, so management processes to undertake a project successfully. So hence, when you are talking about project management, you need to have a proper set of skill. Okay, so you need to have a proper set of tools. You need to have a proper set of processes. Okay, so skills are to do with people. Okay, tools are to do with IT, for example. Okay, if it's since we are a lot moving towards IT, so I would just associate it being IT. But however, in our course of study, we will not be using IT that much. So we will go back to the fundamental of how do you actually get the numbers from a software. Okay, so from a project, Microsoft project, for example, what is the function when I place in this? So what is finish to start with two? Why do I put that? So though you need to know the fundamentals of it, then you can basically input it in the IT. So IT is basically the application of your knowledge. Okay, so without the knowledge, you just simply play around with the IT tool. The outcome might not be as what you intended to be. Okay, so when you're talking about IT, when you're talking about ICT tools and so on, in a good input will produce a good output. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay, so that's very important. So any input to any software or IT BIM model, wrong input is totally gone. Okay, so the input is very important. So you need to know what is the input. Okay, and you are supported by processes. Okay, so the three elements are interlinked to each other very strongly. Okay, so people, process, technology. Okay, so and if we are talking about improving an organization, okay, so the three elements are very, very important. Okay, so the people element, the process, and also the technology. When you look into studies, there are some studies that highlighted on the importance of tool first or the technology first. There are some studies that might look into the process is the most important. But personally, I would think the most important element of the people, process, technology would be the people. If you have the wrong people, other things, you can't clean the process, you can't smoothen the process, and the technology will come the last. So if you have the right person, right people for it, the right people can smoothen the process. They can know what process are being required, what process are redundant, and they can make, once the process are actually fluent, smooth, and if you need the enhancement of technology, then the introduction of technology comes in. People, process, technology. Okay, so skill to processes. Okay, so it is interlinked to each other, and there will be one point where you would require all of it. Okay, so the skill tool processes basically it overlap, and your project management basically requires all of it to be a success. Okay, there are other descriptions to project management. Okay, so it's about organization. Okay, so it can be about decision making. Obviously, you have a lot of decision making to make in a project. Okay, given that you have the constraint of time or you have the constraint of cost. If you do not have such constraint, decision making will not be difficult. Okay, so you can just make your decision. There are no risks, there are no rewards out of it. So decision making is just plain decision making. But if you have this constraint, okay, so your time constraint, your scope constraint, your budget constraint, okay, you need to make a decision which is well informed. Okay, so it shouldn't be a decision which is reckless. Okay, so I think when we are making a decision, it should be a well-informed decision. Okay, so meaning to say that you know what is the risk. If I choose option A, what would be the outcome? What would be the negative? What would be the positive outcome of the decision? So this should be well-informed. What do you call a well-informed decision. Cuma sometimes we make decision recklessly because being biased. Okay, so as a project manager, or I think even in an daily life, whatever decision you want to make, it should be made not purely based on your instinct, okay, or your biasness, but it should be well informed too. Very important decision making. Okay, all right. So other than that, it's about changing people's behavior. Um, maybe a little bit, but I think it's quite difficult to change people's behavior. Okay, so it's not easy to influence someone to change their behavior. What can we do? Okay, but the most you can do is being a leader that creates the culture. When you can create a culture in an organization, other people tend to follow. Itu je lah. You might not be able to change the correct characteristic or the core of someone, okay, but however, if you can slowly change the culture, okay, change the working ethics or change the working processes of the people follow through, then a new people coming into a certain project, they would see that okay, this is how this team works. So it kind of like make them a part of that team, and they could actually being influenced by the culture. So I think more on setting the culture rather than changing their core behavior is, I think, is two different things. Okay, and project management is about creating an environment conducive to setting critical project. Okay, these are just simple how to say statements of it. Okay, so when things appear to be going better, you have overlooked something. It can never look easy in a project. Okay, so it will never be a bed of roses. Okay, so if it's too good, okay, so you might have overlooked something. So usually there are things we can improve. That's why when we are looking at project management, we have this PDCA cycle. Okay, plan, do, check, act, you plan again. So it is always in a loop. It is always in a cycle, because when you are talking about improving something, it is always continuous. You will not get a perfect situation. So there will not be one situation which is like utopia, perfect as it is. It can never happen. Okay, there will be something yang what do we call it? There will be something that you have missed out. Okay, so there will be something to improve all the time. So benda tu penting. You have to accept that, and you will see that you have improved something. Move on to the other things to improve. Move on to the other things to improve. There are things that you can improve. Okay. Okay, so no system is ever completely debugged. Okay, so there must be something. There must be certain processes might be lacking some infos or and so on. Okay, a carelessly planned project will take 3 times longer to complete. This is just a number. Okay, it's just a statement saying that if you plan a project carelessly, okay, so without much thoughts given to it, there are a lot of errors that you need to rectify during the project. Okay, so that's why when you plan a project, it should be well thought of from every single angle. So if you just plan it carelessly without having these thorough thoughts about it, banyak you need to rectify. Okay, so a carefully planned project will take, okay, all right. So there are a lot of definition on a project. Okay, so there are a lot of different definition on a project. So for example, it's a set of people, resources, temporarily example, okay, to reach a specific objective with fixed budget, fixed period. Okay, so generally associated with products, procedures that are being done. Okay, I don't need you to memorize the definition. Okay, so I don't you won't have any question that, okay, Graham 1995, what was the definition of project? No, so it will not be question to you. Who define what project ada? What is a project? Okay, so what is important for you to know when we mention a project? It is temporary. Okay, so you must know that a project is temporary endeavor. Okay, so undertaken to create a unique product or service. Okay, so the keyword here is temporary. Another keyword here is unique. Okay, so temporary meaning to say that you would have temporary organization structure, you would have temporary resources. Okay, so it will be at within a certain period time there. Okay, so if it's 1 year, then it will be 1 year. Okay, so it should be pre-agreed upon the stakeholders and the funder. Unique is not a meaning to say that the design is unique. It means that every construction project, even with the same design, it is unique. So it is unique in a sense that the worker who work on two different projects, but with the same design, there are different workers. Okay, so worker on site A, worker on site B, same design but different workers. And in fact, when you're talking about a same locality, okay, same design, tapi ground condition might differ. Okay, so the supplier might differ. So unique in a sense that you might come across, you will not have the same unique, okay, this person built that, this is how they are it is built, the weather is the same type. So weather might differ, so soil condition might differ, people who construct it might differ, even though the design is the same. Okay, so that is what it mean by unique. So unique tu bukan the design is unique, special ke, bukan. Okay, unique is because every day is unique. The construction today and tomorrow might differ due to weather situation and so on. Okay, so that is the meaning unique. Okay, so take it from here, when you're talking about project, it must be temporary. So you can see that the time is temporary, organization structure is temporary, people working there temporary. Lepas project complete, they will be shifted elsewhere. Unique, it is constructed by different workers, different soil condition, different what do you call, supplier for different site, different what do you call, climate. Okay, so that is the meaning of unique. Okay, so other than that, basically it can be any size project, it can be large, it can be small project. Okay, so it's temporary. Okay, so temporary, it distinguish project from operation. Okay, so this one is another thing I want to highlight. Temporary, which means there is a start, there is an end date. Operation, it is ongoing. So for example, ialah facilities management. Okay, so maintenance, those are operation. So you have scheduled maintenance throughout the building. So aircon, for example. So if your building is to stand 20-30 years to come, okay, so your maintenance is scheduled as such. So it is not temporary, it is basically more or less permanent until your building ends. Okay, so operation. So it is different from operation. And unique is not the same old thing lah. It's not the same thing. Okay. Examples of project, it can be, I think I've mentioned it in the last class. When we talk about project, it can be from any different sectors. It can be from services, it can be from ICT, so long within that sector, they have certain project. Manufacturing is an operation. Okay, so manufacturing of cars is an operation. So because daily you have workers going in or into the factory and produce the cars. So those are operation. But when you're coming up with a new design for a car, that is a project. So the designers will be given certain period of time. So mungkin a month or two, for example, to come up with a prototype and then to test and so on. So those are basically projects. So within every sector, there are projects. Okay, so these are just simple examples of what are projects. So planning a wedding, designing, implementing a computer system, especially software. Okay, so those are actually software is one of the projects we have been, which is associated for being a project, you know, quite long ago. Okay, so brochure. So you can see that a lot of things, simple things. So but those are considered project because given that the characteristics of it is temporary, is unique. Okay, so and so on. So what is not a project? Any emergency response to operation problems. Okay, your aircon got shut down. Okay, so your aircon having a water leaking problem. Okay, so that requires repair. So that is not a project. Emergency response is not a project. A project should be well intended, should have an aim, should have objective, which is basically is being planned. Emergency is not planned. It happened as such and you just need to solve the problem. Okay. And another thing, what is not a project is a routine operation support. It's not a project. Okay, so maintenance of equipment is not a project. Any tuning, any modification, calibration of equipment is not a project. Okay, so emergency and operation is not a project. Okay, so other characteristics of a project. Okay, so you can see that it is being repeated quite a lot of times. So I think when it's being repeated as such, you should be able to grasp the idea really fast. Okay, so a project is unique. Okay, it would differ from one another. Okay, so when it differs, so uncertainty, there is a spelling error here. Okay, uncertainty. So when it differs, there are different aspects of risk to a certain project. Okay, even though the project is having the same design, two different areas, the risk would differ. Okay, so it depends. Every project is unique in that sense. Okay, so when it's unique, the risk differs, the uncertainties differs. Okay, and project have goal. Okay, so that's why it's not emergency case. Okay, so it must have a certain goal to achieve. It would require resources, temporary resources. It would require budget. It would require schedule. Okay, so you can see that the resources, time, okay, it would require the effort of people. Measures of quality will apply. Okay, so that is where comes into the picture. You have the specification of a project. Okay, so you have a scope of a project, you have the quality you need to fulfill for a project. Okay, so it requires temporary organization. Okay, so temporary structure, especially your organization structure at project site, and it is not permanent in nature. Okay, so your project cannot go on forever and ever and ever. Okay, so if it goes on forever and ever and ever, it is an operation. Okay, so that's why when a certain project exceeds certain time frame, it will be called you know, sooner or later it becomes an abandoned. So it shouldn't be forever. Okay, so it is not permanent in nature. Okay, this is another project definition given by PM Zol actually. Okay, so a project is organized work towards predefined goal. Okay, so you can see that the words are basically repetitive. Okay, so predefined goal that requires resources, effort, is unique. Okay, that gives it a risky situation and the risk would be different compared to each other. Have a budget, have a schedule, temporary organization, and not permanent in nature. Okay, so the characteristics are similar. Cuma the way you put the apa ni? Okay, so the way you put it might differ. Okay. All right. So objective of project management to ensure project is correctly designed to meet its objective, to ensure the project is completed on schedule, within resource and within budget, and to provide a mechanism to monitor the project. Okay, so these are some of the project management objectives. Okay, and the first one, to ensure that project is correctly designed to meet its objective. What is the objective or what are the objective of your project? If you're talking about construction, your project is pretty much clear cut. Okay, so usually your project is to be completed within the time frame and so on. And but what are we talking about? So construction can be infrastructure, construction can be building. Okay, so it can be whatever that you're constructing. So your objective should be clear. So hence, when we are moving forward with project management processes, the first process is to define your project management aim, objective. What is to be constructed? How do we know that this is the right one or this is the one that the client requires? So there are certain processes that we require to engage the client. Okay, so without the agreement of the client, without knowing the proper objective, it will be like headless chicken. Okay, so you like have some idea in your mind, this is how it's going to go, but without proper agreement, without proper documentation, it will be just mindless. Okay, so knowing the objective explicitly is very, very important. Okay, so is to ensure that the project objective outcome fully agreed by all involved. Okay, so there is no point that you as a architect, for example, you are being called upon early in a project to get or to draw or to come up with the conceptual drawing, tapi it's like you can't get the real idea that from the funder. So it's no point. And at the end of the day, this will go nowhere because you could not get the agreement by all. Okay, objective should be achievable. Okay, so usually the objective should be set based on the SMART system. Okay, so have a schedule, measurable, achievable, and so on. Okay, so given that construction projects are physically measurable, okay, so to a certain extent. Okay, so you can measure the progress, you can measure how much you have actually spent, and you can measure the quality as well. Okay, so how well the project has been constructed. Okay, so we'll talk about it later when we go into chapter 3. Okay, so on quality and so on, how can we assure the quality of a project, given that we at this moment we do receive a lot of this defected buildings and so on. Okay, so objectives should be achievable. So if a project has been perceived and could not be completed within the time frame, it should not be agreed upon. So it should be achievable given the resources yang the designer is having or the contractor is having. Okay, so an objective should satisfy customers' needs. Very important. Okay, but cuma when we talk about construction, who is the customer? If we are talking about how let's say it is residential houses, usually the customer, the first-hand customer would be the client, but ultimately the end user will be the customer. The buyer of the house will be the customer. Cuma how far does our residential area, okay, the houses that we buy, satisfy our needs? So because usually it is an end product, so we do not have any say in terms of the design, we do not have any say in terms of what do you call it, the allocation of rooms and so on. So our satisfaction is basically dependent on the client's perspective. Okay, so we kind of try to suit ourselves into their shoe basically. But there are those are the constraints that we are talking about in terms of a customer in construction. Unless you buy a piece of land at zero, okay, so just a piece of land and you design on your own and you hire your own designer and come up with your own house. But besides that, if we are talking about a normal market, usually we are dependent on the client or the what do you call, the developers perspective, and we try to suit our taste to the developer lah basically. Okay, so ultimately, but still the satisfaction. How come they're coming in so late? Ke terkeluar. Okay, so the next one, to ensure that the project is completed on schedule, within the resource and also budget. Okay, so to ensure that the resource budget agreed, consistent with the needs of the project, and to ensure that the life of the project is clearly defined. Okay, so this one we would have one topic on it, project definition. And the third one is to provide a mechanism to monitor a project. If you don't have project, you don't have the processes of planning and so on, then it's quite difficult that you do not even have a tool to monitor the project. So hence, when you do not have a tool to monitor, then your project might not comply to the agreed path. Okay, so hence it provides a mechanism to ensure that your project is consistent to the agreed planned activities. Okay, so you have progress report and how your communication would be dealt with and so on. Okay, so because when you're talking about construction, there are many parties involved. Your communication is not only to one stakeholder, and there are many, okay, including local authority, including different consultants, different subcontractors, and so on. So hence, it provides a mechanism to correct or stop failing project. So if you don't monitor, you will not know when you need to make the correction. Okay, so it starts by having a proper plan. You can monitor, then you can make the corrective action if there are any deviation. Okay, so that's that. And why project management? Without a proper skill, without proper tool, without proper processes, is quite difficult. Okay, so the environment is getting more complicated and more complex as the time goes by. Okay, so it's a method, mindset to approach to managing chaos. Okay, so and basically when we are mentioning about construction, it's quite a chaotic situation that needs to be managed well. Okay, so it provides a framework for working amidst persistent changes nowadays. Okay, so before we move on to the next one, this is really important. Okay, so when we are talking about project management trade-off, there are one tool which is not here. Okay, so we call it project priority matrix. So I do not have it here, so I need you to actually have a notepad with you, or anything you can jot down, because it is not in the slide. Okay, so there is one tool that I need to highlight, and we'll do it together. We'll go through the tool together. It's called Project Priority Matrix, that ultimately showcases the project management trade-off. Okay, before we move on, any question in regards to what we have done so far? Tak ada soalan ke? Sometimes I'm just afraid that, am I going too fast, too slow, understandable?
Understandable.
Okay, no question.
Okay. All right, good. So do you need a short break? Maybe 5 minutes break? We come back at 9?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so just take your 5 minutes break. Please come back at 9 sharp. Okay, so 5 minutes up. Let's continue. Okay, so the next section is important. All right, so please take careful note on it. Project management trade-off is basically where you have the constraint and what you can trade off, apa yang the client could actually accept if there are limitation to it. Okay, why? Because we cannot get the best of everything. Okay, so it is noted that you can't have the cheapest cost, lowest cost in a shortest duration of time, but with the best scope of work. Impossible. Okay, so you can't get the best of everything. You can't get the lowest cost, the shortest period of time, but with a very, very enhanced good scope. So hence, what usually as a project manager or in this situation, if you are the first person the client contacts with, okay, so the for example is the architect. Usually it plays a huge role to get a clear picture from the client on what would be the trade-off. Okay, so if you increase in scope, okay, so there should be areas where you should actually give and take. Okay, so if you increase the scope, you might increase the cost and you might increase the time. Okay, so that is the limitation. So if you try to reduce the cost, okay, so let's say budget is too small. If the client says that, okay, I need a reduction in cost, so it could influence scope. So your scope might not be as you want. Okay, so reduction in scope, and you might actually increase in time. Okay, so you don't have that much of resources in terms of direct resources. Okay, so trade-off is where what it means by what you can accept as being trade-off. Okay, so you want a good cost. Okay, so you want the lowest cost. Ada benda, what is the sacrifice? Something like that, project management trade-off. Okay, so the sacrifice that the client wants to take. Okay, so in general, there are three types of trade-off in general. Okay, so you have the time constraint. Okay, so the amount of time available to complete a project. You have the cost constraint, which is the budgeted amount available for the project. Okay, and you have the scope constraint. What must be done to produce the project's end result? Okay, so what is the scope of work? So the three common elements that we usually talk about will be the time, the cost, the scope. Unless the client has additional variables or additional elements which are important for the project. So for example, any safety elements which is part of the constraint, or if it's a project that is highly could which could highly impact on the environment. Okay, so heavily such as the build of dam, for example. Okay, so that would require another constraint, which is the environmental constraint. Okay, so probably the impact to the environment is too huge, and there are serious damage or potential serious damage to the environment. However, the project has been approved due to the necessity, probably. So that might be an additional constraint to it. But in typical project, we might take into account time, cost, and also scope. Okay, so these three constraints are basically competing constraint. Okay, so meaning to say that you can't get the best of everything. So there should be a trade-off. There should be like a, what would you sacrifice in giving the others more. Okay, so typically you can say that the increase in scope, okay, so would mean that you need to increase the time and you might also increase the cost. Okay, so if you increase from constructing or from building one bedroom to two bedroom, for example, you need to increase the time of in completing, and you need to increase the cost as well. Okay, so the workers, the material, and so on. Okay, a tight time, okay, so the reduction in time, okay, or a tight time constraint could mean that you need to increase the cost. Okay, so because the time is too tight, okay, so you need to input a lot of workers. Okay, if a time that it has been shortened by the client, you need to input your workers, you need to input your material, your cost might increase. Okay, so of course, even if you're going to submit your FYP, okay, to print expert, for example, or any what they call photocopy shop, tight, you will need to pay more. So advisable, your FYP ke, your thesis later kemudian, you have ample of time so that you don't need to pay the increased cost too. Okay, so any tight time, any constraint in such will increase the cost. And since the time is already tight, you might require reduction in scope. Okay, and a tight budget, okay, a small budget could mean increase in time. Okay, so because you have a very tight budget, so you might not be able to bring in so many workers at the point of time. Okay, so hence you need to delay it a bit, you need to extend the time, and with a tight budget, you might need to reduce the scope. Okay, so you can see that when you're talking about trade-off, dia ada benda yang you will lose. Okay, so you want to increase in something, you will result in losing something. Okay, so you cannot get increase in scope will basically reduce the time and reduce reduce the cost. Impossible. Okay, so typically this is what it is. Okay, project management trade-off. Okay, so before we move on to the life cycle of a troubled project, what I need to do is you should have your notes with you already, and I would like to just walk you through on project priority matrix. Okay, so please get through on your own, draw it on your own. I need you to just follow through what I'm doing here. Kejap, tak boleh nampak kan? I did not share it. Hold on, let me stop presenting here and move on to here. Okay, so what I need you to do, add this to your notes. Okay, so this is not in the notes given to you. Add this to your notes, project priority matrix. Okay, so it's a tool for engaging client on the trade-off. Okay, so how do we know what the client actually emphasize on? So I need you to come up with a table. Table as such. Okay, so place the three elements there: time, cost, scope. Okay, and the three variables of accept, enhance, and constraint. This is a very simple tool just to engage the client on what is the trade-off that they might be thinking of. Okay, so for example, let's say you have a client that is from the public sector. Okay, so let's say this client, probably let's say JKR, okay, and they are planning to build a school. Okay, and these are the common variables, and these are the common feedback from the client. Okay, so whether can they accept the time, require enhancement, and also constraint. Okay, when we mention accept, okay, let's say for example, accept time, it is meaning to say that the client accept if the time variable is jeopardized. So jeopardized in a sense that time will be extended. Okay, so if the client mentioned that, okay, I accept the time feature in this project, meaning to say that the client would accept if there are any delay to the project. Okay, and if the client accept cost, it means that the client would accept if there are any additional costs that occur in a project. Okay, and if the client accepts scope, it means that the client would accept if the scope is to be reduced. Okay, so meaning to say that the client will accept this variable in the worst situation. Okay, so I would repeat, if the client accept scope, okay, so the client will accept that given the other variables, okay, challenging variables trade-off, the client will accept if the scope is to be reduced. Okay, maybe from 2 rooms to 1 room, for example. So that is accept scope. But if the client accept the cost, so the meaning to say that the client would accept if the cost is to be increased from the original agreed cost. Okay, and if the client accepts the time feature, meaning to say that the client would accept any extension to the time, any delay, it could be accepted, absorbed by the client. Okay, and if the client require enhanced time, so which means the client require you to enhance this feature. Enhancing this feature of time, meaning to say that reduction in time. Okay, so the client would require, given that other variables as such, the time to be enhanced, meaning to say that the time should be reduced. Okay, enhancement in cost. Okay, so if it's possible, the client would want you to reduce the cost. Okay, but if you're talking about enhancing the scope, if possible, the client would want you to increase the scope. Enhance the scope means increase the scope. So you can see that when you talk about enhance ni, dia bukan all pertambahan. It is not all increasing. It is not all adding. Okay. So when you are trying to enhance the time, of course we want a shorter time. If you want to enhance the cost, lower cost. But if you're talking about enhancing the scope, it is the increment of the scope. Okay, so not all the variables here, if you're talking about enhance, dia akan enhance tambah. Enhance is just, in other words, when we're talking about enhance, is to make better. If you want to make better, the time variable is to reduce the time. If you want to make better the cost variable, it is to reduce the cost. And if you want to make better the scope variable, it is to increase the scope. That's the idea. Okay. Constraint is pretty straightforward. Okay, so when you're talking about constraint time, the time is fixed as such. Okay, if it's 6 months project, the client wants you to complete in 6 months. Itu je. Okay, if your cost is constrained, your let's say it's $1 million project, your cost should be completed within the $1 million. Okay, so it should be 1 million. That's all constraint. And if scope is the constraint, so it means that 2 bedroom, 2 bedroom. Okay, so to follow the specification, that is constraint. So which means the client do not want you to have any changes to that variable, fixed as it is. Okay, and normally this tool will be used at the very beginning of a project before we move on to understand in detail what the client requires. But before we can understand what the client requires, this is the basic assumption that we would take. Okay, in general, you want to build as such, but what is your constraint? What is your variable that you can give leeway to? Okay, so what you can accept and what is fixed and you do not want any changes. Okay, so let's say for a school project, okay, so let's say for example, okay, so let's say for a school project, okay, so it's a governmental project, public project. Okay, what would be the constraint? What do you think would be the constraint in a school project? Is it the time factor? Is it the cost factor? Or is it the scope factor? That would be a constraint for a school project.
Scope.
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 Scope. Okay, let's say we place in the scope as a constraint, meaning to say that two-story building, it will be two-story. How many classroom? It will be as such. Okay, so it will be given in the specification and also contract. The build of double-story lab, for example. Okay, so scope. And what could be accepted by the client? Apa yang boleh di sort of like dikorbankan sikit? What could be accepted by the client? Would it be cost or will it be time?
Time.
Probably time. Okay, so if you are not in urge, maybe if there is a certain delay, it could be acceptable. And what could be enhanced or to reduce or to make better could be the cost. So make sense tak? If it's a school project. Boleh for a school project. So scope to be constrained. Okay, so because there is a certain specification that to be fulfilled by the client, to be fulfilled by the contractor, to ensure the security, to ensure the safety of the people occupying, that will be students. Okay, so that is the constraint. And then the cost to be reduced. Okay, so if there are potential saving, it could be reduced if possible. That's why when we talk about enhance here is to make better, kalau boleh. Okay, so it is to be reduced the cost. The time is acceptable. Okay, if it's a typical project, there is no urgency for the school to be built secepat mungkin. Okay, so it's just that increment in population in the area, but it is not urgent. Maybe time could be accepted. Okay, so which meaning to say that if there are certain delay to it, still boleh accept. Okay, but obviously this comes into agreement with the client initially because you have contract kemudian hari. Okay, so there are contracts to be signed. So this should be how to say, this should be accepted by the client and it should be in a certain clause as such. Okay, so this is one example. How about another one? Let's say is another example. Let's say religious building. Okay, so a building for religious purposes. Mesti kejap ya. Okay, so let's say you're coming up with a religious facility using donation from people. Okay, so what do you think would be the constraint except enhance here? Let's say you're coming up with a religious building, donation from people. Which do you think would be the constraint?
Cost.
Cost will be the constraint, fixed. Okay, which will be your asset maybe?
Scope.
Scope do you think asset? Okay, and time to be enhanced. Okay, can be. Okay, so if you see that you among you guys, there might be certain people who are saying scope might be accepted, or maybe time might be accepted because not in urgent need, and then scope can be enhanced. Kita reduce sikit certain features. If you look at it, there is no right, there is no wrong. Okay, it is just a tool that displays a client's client's opinion. client's perception on how they want the project to move on. So if you usually in a test or in a question, you will be given much more detailed scenario. Okay, it will be stated to you, okay, there are constraints by this government as such, and there are a much more detailed explanation, a much more detailed scenario that actually would um, kind of direct you to assign which is the accept, which variable to be enhanced, which variable to be constrained. At this moment, it is just a simple what you call simple example of how we can actually gather the input from the client. Let's say this is the client of search, and what are the potential takeaways. Okay, so trade-off between the variables, so it can be either one. So you might have someone using that, I think it can be time as accept, true, it can be scope as enhanced, true. So there is no right or wrong, because everyone's thought will be different in such a way. But in the test, if we require you to come up with a specific elements directing you to answer certain elements here in a fixed manner, then the explanation, the scenario given to you would be quite detailed. It will not be open-ended. Unless we require you to come up with open-ended as such, then you can just place it accordingly. Okay, as such, for example, you can place because it is a religious building, given donation by people, so the cost is fixed as such. Okay, because that is that much of the donation you get it from people. So once you have that donation, you will go into the time, or you go into the asset. Okay, what we can trade off with. Okay, maybe the scope. So we might not require the whole design that we have, so we might reduce in certain facility, so you can accept that. Okay, but if possible, you want to reduce the time, maybe because the population in the area is getting more, and you think that the what do you call, it is needed urgently by the people surrounding the area. So maybe you want to want it to have as fast as possible. If possible, reduce the time. So when you're trying to place it as such, please explain. Okay, so if there are any test question as such, please make sure that whatever you have listed here, it is justified. It is explained well. Okay, so why the constraint, why the enhance, why the accept. Okay, so you need to be able to understand what it means by these three variable and why logically you will put it here. So it's pretty straightforward. It is based on logic. So if it's open-ended as such, even if you put here or here, it will not be wrong, unless it is obvious that you can't even justify why you place it in such a way. That if it is justifiable, then it should be fine. Okay, so this will be project priority matrix. So I hope all of you have gathered this. So but you need to understand very well, accept, enhance, constraint ni apa, because usually in the question it will be given to you a scenario, given various factors that might be affecting a project, and based on that you make the evaluation which variable you might consider it to be constrained, enhance, also accept. So far, any question on this? So, but normally this one might be the one that usually I might get question, or it might get tricky. Any question?
Doktor,
Yeah. Syafiq.
ya. Doktor, maksudnya kita kena complete ada accept, enhance dengan constraint lah. Kita tak boleh macam ada dua enhance, satu accept ke apa.
Tak boleh. Because from the trade-off, dia ada tiga elemen. You must have one of each. You cannot have, ni tak boleh. So I want to constrain my time. Okay, so time is constrained. And then I accept the scope reduction, but I also want you to reduce the cost. dia tak boleh. So dia it does not fit to the trade-off. So you must have one of each in different boxes. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Doktor.
Alright. Other questions?
Doktor,
Yes.
kalau Arif, kalau in real life, kalau tiba-tiba kita punya klien memang minta untuk kita reduce time tapi dia tak nak increase cost. So kita kena buat apa? Kita kena reduce quality ke? Kita kena
Kalau dia reduce time tapi dia tak nak increase cost, okay, you will reduce the scope, but it needs to be mentioned. It is somehow rather you would need to consider dia macam reduce kejap let me put it. Basically you want to reduce the time, enhance and then cost also you want to constrain lah kan, fix kan, you want to increase scope lah. So your scope need to be accepted. So your scope will be reduced if you based on that scenario Arif bagi tu.
Tapi doktor, kalau dia nak ada dua benda yang constraint,
actually tak boleh. This is bila dia dah dua benda constraint, or let's say dua benda dia nak enhance ni, scope to be time is to be reduced, cost is to be reduced, dia sepatutnya dia tak boleh. So this should be sebenarnya explained to the client, but that's the thing, this is the constraint that we have in the industry. They want the best of everything, but the rule does not allow it. You will lose something. You will definitely lose something. The ideal will be this. So, but sometimes, yes, I understand at the site, you might get clients who are constrained on the time, but also constrained on the cost. How do you want to manage that time frame is what fixed and you have planned it as such, but at the same time, you want the cost to be constrained as well. So, dia tak balance. So when dia tak balance macam tu, it might jeopardize something lah. So the most you will sacrifice a lot on the scope tu nanti. So it will become an imbalanced project. So a balanced project, you will have one yang you akan sacrifice as such. So if tak ada, agak sukar lah. Okay, so normally this should be advisable to the client. But if the client would see that there are drawback from it, it should be mentioned to them. If you want to enhance some of it, you will badly delimit the other factors too. Not easy lah. Sometimes on the site, in the real project, it is not as idealistic as such. But there will be drawback to it. Itu je lah. Or else you have to be smart about it as a project manager. You have to be smart to arrange your costs super tightly. That's why we come into a problem when the contractor try to cut off a super tight project within a time frame. Itu yang you have the effect on the quality, you affect on so many other things. That is why all the problems come into picture, because of the imbalance too. But ideally, in a theoretical point of view, this is what should be done. Okay?
Okay, thank you doktor.
Okay, any other question lagi? Tak ada Okay, if tak ada, everyone got this ke? Do you need me to share this slide with you nanti? Okay, I'll just share this slide in the WhatsApp group lah. I think I don't need to upload it, so I'll share it in the WhatsApp group. But I hope everyone got it lah in your notes. Okay, alright. So let's move balik to our slide tadi tu. Okay, life cycle. So basically we have completed trade-off, project priority matrix. So to find the balance too, I mentioned. So but in reality, it's not that beautiful lah. It will not be that beautiful, and that's why in reality you will come into decision that is difficult for you to make. You have to make decision because of external factors, factors from client, factors from a lot of sources actually. Okay, so that's why that macam Arif asked too, it will become imbalance. Imbalance to a lot of other problems lah. Okay, so you have to be smart at the point of time. How you going to manage a project given that that is the constraint, given that is the wanting of the client and so on. So, and that creates chaos. Okay, so you can see that when you're having a project, okay, so it can be a lot of trouble. It will not be as nice, smooth, cantik. So there will be chaotic chaotic situations. Okay, project starts. Okay, so you have project initiated, and then you will have a client which are very enthusiastic. Okay, with the best perspective, best project to be developed and so on. Okay, and then these are just how to say just scenarios. Okay, so you will get client placing a lot of high expectation on the consultant, the contractor, okay, but comes in chaos, okay, so chaos not only based on the wanting of the client, the disagreement you get with the stakeholder, the other stakeholders, contractor, consultant, there are so many chaos. One of the chaos might be also between your own personnel, so it's chaotic. Okay, when as such in a project, okay, so you have a lot of bias decision making, you have delays, cost overrun, then you need to find someone to take the guilt. Okay, so obviously if you have a meeting, okay, so you have the client, consultant, contractor meeting, it is like defending it is like a defense medium, okay, defense platform for each stakeholder, whereby as a contractor lah, biasanya contractor in such a meeting, if there are any certain delays, the fault will be on usually it will be pinpointed or directed to one stakeholder. So this is where you're going to put the blame from A to B, B to A. Contractor request for RFI, request for information from the consultant mungkin bagi lambat. Okay, so it will be check and balance, and you'll be quite chaotic lah actually during the meeting. You have a lot of blame game and so on. So sometimes being in such a meeting could actually transpire you to be like, okay, this is how the real construction industry it is what it is as such. Okay, but that is the problem. It roots back to the adversarial relationship yang kita bina. Okay, especially if you have procurement system yang traditional. You have the client, you call in one entity or consultant, okay, different consultant working with each other, and then you have contractor hired, let's say from open tender. Okay, so you hire in the contractor. Everyone have their own aim, everyone have their own responsibility. They are not working in a team. Okay, so you have the consultant completed the design, nah ambil, move on to the contractor, take in, try to see the design. If there are issues, getting back to the consultant lambat nak respond. So typically there are a lot of these situation where we are just keeping ourselves safe. Okay, so we are trying to defend ourselves. So that's why very important in a construction or in any way, your black and white documentation is very important. So this is where during the meeting you need to highlight, okay, there are certain requirements for extension of time. Who is to be blamed? Why the project has been delayed? Those are the things you need to have your evidence with you. So the search for the guilty. So black and white in construction, very, very, very important. Not only construction, in any, if you ask me, in any way, in any situation, anything that safeguard yourself. So that's why even in construction, everyone is working on their own capacity, own perspective. So towards one point, not as a team, it creates this blame game, it creates this adversarial environment. So architect and civil CNS, they cannot sit along together. Contractor, consultant cannot sit along together. So that creates this ambience yang memang difficult to get a successful project if you have this adversarial. So that's why in foreign countries they are really emphasizing moving towards procurement system yang lebih berbentuk partnering. Okay, so it's in a form of partnering in a sense that we work together, we share the profit together. If there are any losses, we share together. So it creates the ambience yang everyone is helping each other in a team manner. So that is the calling basically in the overseas, okay, in terms of procurement. But in Malaysia, we are not there yet. Okay, so we are still different entity, and we are still working in silo basically. That is one of the major constraint for us to come up with a very solid project, because of in isolation. We work in isolation too. Okay, anyhow, we have all this search for guilt, adversarial, so punish the innocent. Sometimes there will be court cases. Okay, normally in construction we try to talk things through. Okay, so if there are any dispute, we try to engage with each other face to face dulu. If you can't, usually we move on to having a mediator, third party, for example. Okay, so maybe let's say it's a stakeholder within the project. Let's say the third party within the project tak boleh juga, so the dispute is still ongoing, you get external mediator. Okay, so the mediator will look into the evidence from here, what is the situation, and try to come up with a common ground. Let's say tak boleh, maybe you have this adjudicator. Let's say adjudicator pun tak boleh, so there is an adjudicatorial system yang kita boleh go through. Let's say tak boleh, the worst case would be through the court system lah. That one will be so leceh, that will be so troublesome, waiting for the period that the case will be brought out. Okay, so that is the worst case scenario. Okay, so court case. So that's why when we are talking about construction, dispute and so on, there are various processes we could try to settle the dispute. But if let's say it could not be settled still, then it will be a major hiccup to the project, because it goes to the court and so on. Okay, yang ni is we are talking about people je lah, promotion of non-participant and so on. So this one basically it might be, but it is to do with the people, not to do with the project. So chaotic, you can see that actually is more like the people within the organization. Okay, so I would say that this could be a good image, or basically a good sketch to actually show you when you are basically in a working organization. There will be people as such, there will be people as such, there will be people as such. So the main thing is you have to take care of yourself, especially when you're working. Okay, so especially when you go on to work, you need to be very, very careful with your colleagues and so on, because everyone is for themselves. Okay, so this one is one of the things you have to be very careful. So silap air bulan, you will get penalized for something that you have not done. Okay, so promotion of non-participants, especially yang did not contribute much. Okay, so things happen, okay, in an organization, but this is where you have to be very careful. You have to be smart about whatever decision you're making and so on. Okay, all right, so okay, when we are talking about project, okay, so there will be a life cycle. Okay, and the life cycle might be as such. Every project is the same. Okay, so you will start off with having a conceptual stage, whereby it is just concept je dulu. Okay, so like for example, a client is having an idea. Okay, I want to develop a township in a certain area. maybe a certain area outskirt from Shah Alam, for example. So a lot of townships sekarang dekat outskirt like Puncak Alam, for example. Okay, so a concept, or maybe a client is having this kind of concept. I want to build a luxurious township nearby Shah Alam. Okay, so suburb of Shah Alam. So it's just a concept. Okay, so when the client is having a concept, you need to survey the market. Okay, so if I'm building a luxurious area, suburb or Shah Alam, will there be buyers? Okay, so who will be the buyers? Who will be the potential customer? Okay, and also, do we have other luxurious residential area near the suburb of Shah Alam? So who are our competitors? So those are at that level. So you have the concept, you have to see whether the concept is applicable, the concept is doable and receivable by the people. Okay, let's say you have done the market survey and you think your competition tak ramai. Okay, so probably you are one of the pioneer who's going to come up with such project there. Then you move on to the next stage whereby you define, okay, what do you want in detail? Okay, so what would be a problem? So the problem, maybe one of it is whereby there is customer, there is a customer market for having such luxurious residential area. Probably those areas are basically a lot of typical terrace houses. Okay, so but there are demand for actually having this luxurious kind of residential. There is a gap. Okay, so once you identify there is a demand and there is a need for it, then you can come up with what is the vision, what is the scope, what do you want to build, berapa biji, how many houses do you want to build. Okay, so you define it. Once you define it, then you can plan your activities. Okay, so you can plan your strategy, you can plan your risk. So what are the potential risks? Okay, so if you are developing such a project, where would the locality be? Okay, so planning, and then you execute. Okay, and then you execute. Okay, so you have the activities ongoing, you have people organizing the activities, so you have the procurement system, semua execution. And once you complete your project, you close out the project. Okay, so this is a typical project life cycle, and we will go through this in your course of study for construction. Okay, so for any project, it is typical. You should have this. No matter it's a construction, it's an IT project, but typically you will have all of this. Okay, and close out. So close out is where you close the project. So you can see that the effort that should be done a lot in planning, it happens at the beginning. You can have your effort a lot during the planning because you might overlook certain elements. If you're wrong at the concept, your market survey is wrongly giving you the wrong analysis, you might have the wrong planning and all goes down the drain. Your effort should be a lot placed at the front end of the life cycle. That is one of the important elements you need to know. Effort a lot to the end of the project life cycle, it is just because you did not place much effort at the beginning. You have to carefully think through, do we really have the sufficient need to actually come up with the project? Sometimes it is just an idea. It's just we want something. Okay, tapi without proper input, without proper justification, without proper factor that support it. Buat je dulu, and then you realize that halfway through, you realize that it is not what it is. Okay, so not ideally what you wanted it to be. Then it will create a lot of corrective action. Then your effort besar, tapi it's wasting a lot of time. Your money will be wasted most kat sini. Your planning, your execution, because it involves a lot of cost, material, construction, people, and so on. Your money will be the money expenditure a lot here, and you have done something wrong here, it will escalate a lot in terms of your cost. If you've done a good job here, your cost might might not escalate that much during this time here. So that's why your effort should be placed a lot at the planning stage. Okay, prior to planning and also planning lah. Okay. Okay, so this will be the end of it basically. In project, what do you manage? So I think we have mentioned this. You need to manage scope, schedule, resources, imbalance. Okay, and also time, obviously. Okay, so scope, the work to be done. Schedule is your time, and resources is your cost. Okay, so your cost would result in your resources ni lah, your people, your equipment, your material, and so on. And it should be in balance. So that's why when Arif, when you mentioned about cost reduce, schedule tight, then it is not in balance. Itu yang the resulting outcome of it too, it's not as pretty lah as wanted. Okay, problems of a project. This is just some of it. There are so many more. Okay, it is just some of the items that you might come across when you manage a project. Inadequate resources, especially when you have limited supply. Okay, if you have supply from overseas, so those are the resources or material yang you might have problem with. Tapi when you are talking about COVID, okay, so especially constraint in workers, for example, those are issues lah. Okay, inadequate resources. Unrealistic deadline, this is set if you have conducted a project unrealistically. So the deadline is set by the client too tight and you do not have the resource in hand to complete. So susah lah. Okay, so if it's unrealistic deadline. Unclear goal or direction is one of the problem. So I did mention kat sini, if you have planning improperly done, you are not sure, that results in that. Okay, so unclear goal, unclear direction. So, and people are not sure which is which. So that is true. But I think for construction might not be a big issue because we have contract document. Unless your contract document has not been drafted crystal clear, they did not provide clarity, then it will create problem. Okay, team members uncommitted ni, sometimes it happens if you have a leader which could not command. Okay, so you do not have a leader which could command well. Insufficient planning, I've mentioned. Okay, so it could be a problem. And communication breakdown, it happens when you are not sure the hierarchy of reporting. Okay, so you get from engineer A mentioning this, engineer B mentioning this. Who should you listen to? So communication breakdown if you do not have the chain of command to clear. So if you have the chain of command clear, it shouldn't be a problem. And cuma black and white communication pun penting. Okay, so email, anything in certainty. Okay, so just to back up if there are anything that goes wrong. Okay, so normally how project success defined: on time, within budget, and quality conformance. That's the common one. But in addition to that, we have mentioned before, health and safety nowadays is one of the success defining variable, and also environment. Okay, so if there are any environmental pollution, I think that is one of the affecting variable lah. So variable that could influence success juga depending on the project. Okay, and these are some project management activities. Banyak. So when we go through the project, starting from project definition nanti, you'll be able to see these are the activities in a project management. Okay, so you analyze objective, you plan the activities, you assess the risks when you're trying to conduct a certain project. So what are the potential risks? Estimate the resource, allocate resource, organize. So once we go through this project management processes, starting from project definition, you'll see that there are things that you need to do lah. Okay, so these are basically the concluding elements from the whole project management processes we will go through. Okay, and the benefits, there's a lot. Okay, so it can be satisfied. Obviously, satisfy customers. If you can deliver your project within the time frame, within the cost that is being required. Obviously, when you have satisfied customer, you might have businesses, ongoing businesses. Usually, people will get back to you if you can produce accordingly, if you can produce the outcome as required. Okay, and obviously, as mentioned, of career satisfaction, improve knowledge and skill. Okay, so when project successful, then everyone wins. Okay, but there are so many more benefits from here. This is just a typical general one. Okay, and we complete on chapter history and current development in project management. Okay, so far, any question? Any question from the floor?
No.
Okay, no, I would expect no. So I will pick 2 questions as I've done in the previous class. Okay, so let me see. So think of something now so that you will be able to give me an answer. And please do not leave the room before the end of the lecture. Okay, Raja Ami ada? Mr. Raja Ami?
Yes, ada.
Okay. Try to give us a question in regards to what we have studied for today. Any question?
Okay, wait. Wait.
Ikut, tak ada langsung. Okay, think about it. I'll get back to you. Miss Yasmin? Yasmin Nasi ada? Miss Yasmin? Yasmin Nasir. This is the difficulty with ODL ni masalahnya. Ada? Yeah. Naziha, did you ask any question?
No, I said line Yasmin tak berapa nak okay.
Oh, line dia tak okay. Okay.
Tadi dia cakap on off.
Okay.
Doktor,
Yes, Rajami.
kalau dekat trade off tu, nanti kalau dalam test, table tu kita kena buat lah.
Yes.
Okay.
So usually dalam what do we call it, in the test, usually you will need to develop table tu. So usually it will be given scenario. Okay, so let's say this client is initiating such a project with factors of this. Okay, so constraint in this, something. It will give a scenario to you. Usually, we will request you to be the from the perspective of the client, develop the project priority matrix too. And usually the project priority matrix, you will keep it until the next processes. Once we get into this project planning, scheduling, dia ada relevance balik dengan project priority matrix. So that's why I say it's very important. You have to understand that because you will see that you will use this with effect with the other processes. If let's say it's delay, but this is the matrix. So how? What will be your action plan from that? So you need to understand that matrix dulu. Okay? Rajami, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Doktor.
Alright. Okay, next maybe we can call girl. Darina? Darina Ami ada? Darina Amira. Darina Amira ada?
Ada.
Okay, Darina, give us one question.
Sekejap nak fikir sekejap.
Okay.
Kalau kan lepas kita graduate, macam mana kita nak obtain semua skill yang boleh menjadikan kita project manager yang bagus in short period of time?
Skill. Okay. As an undergraduate, okay, the skill that you can get the fastest, I would say, would be technical skill. So, such as the skill in using tools, so project management tools. So, for example, let me just write in chat. Okay, so skills that you can actually attain, maybe the use of Microsoft Project, you can learn on your own. Okay, or else skills in using Primavera is a software you can learn on your own. So that is the fastest, because when you're talking about skill, about people, about conceptual skill, those are skill yang you will get over time. You will get once you get exposure, the communication with people and so on. But in shortest time, it's a technical skill yang mana you can belajar, you can learn on your own. And skill in maybe this one that I've mentioned a lot. Please check the chat box, yeah. Building information modeling softwares. Okay, so these are common. So maybe you can check on Revit by Autodesk. Okay, so you can look into Revit by Autodesk. And a lot of these BIM softwares, you can actually enroll, or you can actually log in as student. So they will require you to have this student ID or whatsoever, and you can actually learn, use the software as a student. For educational purposes, it will be free. Okay, so those are the things while you are as a student, you can get it in a short period of time. But if you're talking about people, all that requires experience, that will be later on. It's a good question, Darina, the question. So that's why I highlighted a lot. Try to get the skill that you can have as a student, and especially if you are good in learning IT and so on, this is where you can actually enhance, you can get an edge compared to the other people. Okay? Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Doctor.
Okay, so it's in the chat box, so everyone please just take note of it. So for project management, normally you can just learn the MS Project. At least you have an idea how it plays around, and then once you get to the fundamental, what are the elements to, that is where you're going to learn, okay, apa input that you require, just place it in the project, it will calculate for you. Cuma manually kita calculate, dia akan jadi lambat. Okay, so project will be fast lah, it will generate the data for you. Okay, and other technical skills. Okay, all right, so thank you for the question. It's a good question, and hopefully everyone can get advantage of it. All right, so I think we have reached the end of the class, and I thank you everyone for your attendance. Okay, so thank you for your attention. Hopefully everyone could just bear with me throughout this ODL and make sure you are here. Okay. All right, so with that, we end our class today, and thank you.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Doctor.